The sound of a door closing behind her was all Brenda needed to know that there was no turning back. They had made their decision. She had made hers. If you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or simply misunderstood by those closest to you, this story will hit hard. Brenda had been fighting that battle for years, but it wasn't supposed to happen today, not at Christmas, not of all times. If you understand that feeling of being constantly overlooked, please hit like and subscribe, because this is the kind of story we don't hear enough. Stories of perseverance, of resilience, and most of all, of standing tall when everyone tells you to shrink. As the cold winter winds howled outside, Brenda stood at the threshold of her childhood home, staring down the snowy path that led to the front door. The familiar red brick house, where she'd once run in and out with her siblings, felt oddly foreign now. She adjusted the strap of her purse over her shoulder, fingers trembling ever so slightly. Inside, the usual hum of Christmas dinner preparations buzzed through the house, but it wasn't the warmth she expected. No, it was the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, of things that had been building for years. The strained atmosphere was thick with the quiet judgment of those who thought they knew her, of those who assumed they understood who she was, and yet never truly did. It had been a year since she'd last set foot here. A year of quiet, difficult healing after too many confrontations and a sense of being always on the outside. But this time, she'd promised her son, Adam, that she would make it. Christmas was supposed to be different this year. Family together, the house full of laughter, a chance to heal, to finally bridge the gaps. She was trying, desperately, to fit into a narrative she had long outgrown. But now, standing on the icy porch, something felt different. The door that opened had already closed in her face. "Brenda, we didn't think it was a good idea for you to come," her sister's voice had said over the phone, its sharpness biting through the line like cold wind. Brenda's grip tightened on the door handle. "What do you mean?" she had asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. She could hear her breath quicken in anticipation, something swirling in her gut telling her what was coming. But she never expected the words to land so brutally. It's been hard. You know, with everything that's happened. We're all just trying to enjoy the holiday without the tension." The words felt like a slap, each one more stinging than the last. Tension. The word echoed in her head, twisting like a knife. What they didn't understand was that this tension had been a constant undercurrent in her life, a relentless reminder that no matter how much she gave, no matter how much she fought, her own family saw her as someone who didn't fit. And it wasn't even just about her. They couldn't see past her past, her choices, her time in the military. They saw a version of her that fit into their neatly arranged boxes, a version who'd never experienced what she had. Not that she needed their understanding, but damn it, why was it always this way? She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the cold air, then stepped back from the door. She could feel the weight of her decision to leave, to walk away. And yet, she didn't feel the burn of rejection as she thought she might. Instead, there was only the creeping sense of inevitability that gnawed at her insides. It was always like this, wasn't it? Always standing in the shadows, trying to belong to something that never quite accepted her. But now, as she stood outside in the cold, her breath fogging the air, she felt that all too familiar sense of freedom. It was the kind of freedom you only get when you've walked away from the things that trap you. Walking away from her family's judgment wasn't easy, but there was a part of her, buried deep, that had accepted it was the only way forward. There was no way she was going to spend Christmas alone this year. Not again. Not after everything she'd been through. She couldn't let the people who didn't understand her, who never truly saw her, dictate her happiness anymore. So, she got in her car, the hum of the engine comforting as she drove to the one place she knew she would be truly welcomed. Her son's graduation at the base. This time, there would be no barriers, no questioning who she was, no pretensions. The military had always been a refuge. Here, she wasn't just another civilian. Here, she was someone who had proven herself. But as Brenda pulled up to the base, the weight of the day felt heavier on her chest. The uncertainty of the past few months, her relationship with her son strained in ways she hadn't expected, still clung to her. Adam had seen so little of the world that had shaped her, and this was his chance to witness something real. She couldn't afford to let him down now. This Christmas was for him, and if that meant stepping away from family, then so be it. Brenda parked her car in the designated lot, the cool December air biting at her skin as she made her way toward the entrance. She glanced at the clock on her phone, just in time. She pushed through the doors, the sudden warmth of the building making her shiver momentarily. Her eyes adjusted to the light, and there, in front of her, was a sea of men and women in uniform, all gathered for one reason: their families, their future, and their commitment to something bigger than themselves. Her stomach twisted at the thought of Adam, standing at attention in his uniform, probably too nervous to see her among the crowd. She needed to hold it together. She couldn't afford to let the past interfere with the present. Not today. Not on this day when he would stand proud, ready to take on the world. And as she moved through the crowds, trying to find her seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that this time, something would change. Something that would make everything worth it. For the first time, perhaps, she would be recognized for who she truly was. Not just for who they wanted her to be. But what she didn't expect, what she never saw coming, was how one small decision, a moment, a look, an interaction, would turn everything on its head. The noise of the crowd barely registered as Brenda moved through the tightly packed room. The bustle of families, the proud cheers for their children graduating, the sharp scent of military formality, it all faded into the background as she made her way to her seat. She was close now, just a few more steps, and then she would finally sit, alone in a sea of people who had no idea who she was or what she had been through. Brenda had learned to accept this, to be invisible in a way that didn't need validation. It was a comfort and a curse. But before she could settle in, a hand landed on her shoulder, and a voice snapped at her. "Ma'am, this area is for authorized personnel only." The voice was young, harsh, and devoid of the warmth she'd once hoped for from her military family. Brenda turned her head, her eyes meeting the cold blue gaze of a Marine captain standing in front of her. His uniform was pristine, his posture rigid, and his presence demanded attention. She blinked in surprise, taking a step back instinctively. He wasn't just a guard at the door. He was a wall, blocking her path like she was a mere civilian, one who didn't belong. "I'm sorry, Captain," Brenda said, keeping her voice calm. "I'm just trying to find my seat. My son is graduating today." The captain didn't soften his gaze. His jawline was sharp, his expression even sharper. His name tag read Hayes. "Ma'am, I'm sure your son is proud of you, but this area is restricted." His tone remained unwavering, like she was just another unimportant civilian who didn't understand the rules. Brenda's mind flashed to the countless times she had been dismissed for being just a woman or just a civilian. But there was something different in this moment, something that felt more familiar than it should have. She wasn't new to this. She'd faced this kind of condescension on base before, but somehow, with each passing year, it felt less like it could be ignored. "I understand, Captain," she replied evenly, her gaze firm. "I've been stationed here before. I know the procedure." The words felt hollow as they left her mouth, but she needed to say them. She had to maintain control. This wasn't about proving anything to him. This was about getting through this moment without causing a scene, without losing her composure. The captain's eyes scanned her quickly, dismissively. He saw a woman in civilian clothes, a woman who looked like she had wandered too far out of her lane. He saw the blonde hair, the casual top, the jeans. He saw a mother, nothing more, nothing that could warrant his attention. "I'll need to see your visitor's pass, ma'am," he said, his voice now growing less patient. There was a sudden edge to his words, like he was used to dealing with people who didn't follow the rules. Brenda felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. She reached into her purse slowly, the motion deliberate. She didn't want to escalate anything, but she also didn't want to let him think he could intimidate her. She handed him the folded paper without a word. His fingers brushed hers, the touch sharp, condescending. He took the pass, examining it as though it might be a forgery. Holding it up to the light, he scrutinized the photograph, looking back and forth between her face and the identification with the practiced care of someone who'd spent too much time looking for things to be wrong. "Brenda Lowe," he read aloud, as if testing the name on his tongue. "And you're here for recruit Adam Lowe." His eyes narrowed slightly, doubt in them now. The tension between them thickened, the eyes of other families now turning toward the scene. Brenda felt the sting of their attention, the heat of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't let it get to her. She wouldn't. "Yes," she said, her voice level, no trace of emotion. "Adam is my son. "I'll need to see your ID," he said, his words punctuated with finality. His tone was sharp now, no room for negotiation. "Your driver's license." "For verification." Brenda sighed internally, but her face remained impassive. This was no longer just about the pass. He was testing her, challenging her very right to be here, to be seen as something other than a civilian. A mother, a woman in her late 20s who didn't look the part. The quiet anger began to rise, but she held it back, pulling out her driver's license as requested. He took it from her, studying it like it was a piece of evidence, his gaze lingering far longer than necessary. It was clear he didn't believe she belonged here. She wasn't the mother of a recruit, certainly not a Marine. "Everything checks out," he said, barely masking his irritation. But his voice faltered, just for a moment. He looked back at her, now slightly unsettled. Brenda saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She had become something else to him, something other than the woman in front of him. She felt the shift, the change in how he looked at her now. She wasn't just a mother. She wasn't just a guest. No, she had become someone who didn't belong, and that realization was written all over his face. She bristled but said nothing, though the frustration welled up within her. He was forcing the issue, making her a problem when all she wanted was to see her son. The silence between them stretched on as Captain Hayes folded her ID and slid it into his pocket. Brenda could feel the heat of his judgment, the way he sized her up as if she were a threat. The thought flickered through her mind. This is how they always saw me. She had been reduced to a simple woman, a mother, and that was all they thought she could be. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't what she had done. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, to tell him again she was only here for her son, he stepped closer, his hand coming down on her forearm as if to guide her away. His fingers were firm, possessive, and something in the gesture felt wrong, like a man who had lost sight of his duty. Brenda flinched, and as her sleeve shifted, the cold steel of her tattoo, a symbol she had carried for years, flashed beneath her wrist. For a moment, the world seemed to still, the air thickening with something beyond this confrontation. The Marine captain paused, his gaze locked onto the tattoo, his fingers loosening their grip on her arm as if he had just seen a ghost. There wasn't a mistake, not in the way he had initially thought. There was something about it, a symbol of life saved in the heat of battle, something that caused his certainty to crumble, piece by piece. He didn't know it yet, but he had made the worst possible mistake of all. The silence around them deepened, and Brenda could feel the weight of every second stretching out, almost unbearable in its intensity. Captain Hayes stood frozen, his fingers still hovering where they had once gripped her arm, his gaze locked onto the tattoo, an image that carried with it the heavy, unspoken history of a woman who had seen and done things that few could even begin to imagine. Brenda, for the first time, allowed herself a small, inward breath of relief. This moment, this quiet recognition, was the beginning of something much bigger than this encounter. She didn't know it yet, but it was already shifting. Before either of them could speak, a low hum broke the tension, the sound of a vehicle, sleek and black, gliding to a stop near them. Its presence commanded attention, yet it made no noise, no flashing lights or sirens to announce its arrival. It was the kind of vehicle that didn't need to. Every head turned as the doors opened, and out stepped a figure that immediately shifted the dynamic in the air. Colonel Thompson, the base commander, emerged, flanked by the sergeant major and a few other high-ranking officers. Their movements were synchronized, purposeful, the very air seeming to part for them. Captain Hayes immediately snapped to attention, his body rigid, but he couldn't meet Colonel Thompson's gaze. The general's eyes locked onto Brenda, and for a moment, everything else seemed to blur. The colonel's sharp, professional demeanor softened as he took a few steps forward, stopping just inches from Brenda. Without a word, Colonel Thompson rendered the sharpest salute Captain Hayes had ever witnessed. Brenda's heart clenched in her chest, not from the respect being shown to her, but from the deep, enduring recognition of the years that had built up to this moment. She wasn't just Brenda Lowe. She was someone who had earned the highest respect in the very place she'd been dismissed. "Ma'am," Colonel Thompson said, his voice ringing clear and commanding through the tense air. "It is an honor to have you aboard Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island." The captain's face turned ashen as the room fell into complete silence. His posture sagged as he finally understood the gravity of his mistake. His mind raced, scrambling to process what had just happened. This wasn't just a mother. This wasn't just any civilian. Colonel Thompson's words cut through the air like a clarifying bolt of lightning. This woman is a hero to this institution. Brenda Lowe, the colonel continued, his voice booming across the parade deck, is not just a guest. She is a Silver Star recipient. And on November 14, 2004, during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Petty Officer Lowe did what only a few in this world could ever hope to do. She saved lives under direct enemy fire. She held the life of a Marine in her hands and refused to let him die. The Marines of Kilo Company, the men whose lives she saved, they don't call her Petty Officer Lowe. They call her the Angel of the Block. The crowd around them, the onlookers who had gathered for the ceremony, collectively drew in a breath. There was a ripple of understanding, of dawning awe as the weight of the colonel's words sank in. And in that instant, Brenda's son, Adam, standing at attention in formation on the parade deck, turned his head toward the commotion. His eyes found his mother, and his expression shifted. In that fleeting moment, the years of misunderstandings, of half-explained stories, melted away. He saw her, really saw her, for the first time, not just as his mom, but as a hero in the eyes of everyone around them. Brenda felt her throat tighten, the raw emotion flooding her chest. She wasn't sure if she was meant to speak, but as the room settled, she knew one thing for sure. She had earned her place, not just here, but everywhere. The pain of rejection from her family, the assumptions made about her by so many, didn't seem to matter now. Her worth had never depended on their recognition. It had been built in the quiet moments, on the battlefield, in the lives she had saved, and in the respect of the people who knew what she was capable of. Colonel Thompson's gaze turned back to Captain Hayes, who stood like a statue, his face drained of color. "Captain," the colonel said, his voice suddenly cold, "you will report to my office at 1500 hours. We will have a long discussion about leadership, judgment, and how one should never fail to recognize a hero standing right in front of them." The captain could only manage a weak "Aye, sir," before the colonel's steely gaze dismissed him. He had learned his lesson, in the hardest possible way. But Colonel Thompson wasn't done. He turned to Brenda, his voice softening. "Ma'am, I hope you'll join us in the officers' lounge. We have a seat of honor prepared for you. Your son would be proud to have you there." Brenda nodded, her eyes finally meeting the colonel's with the quiet understanding of one warrior to another. After the ceremony, the crowd slowly dispersed, and as Brenda walked to the officers' lounge with the colonel, Adam finally made his way over. His expression had shifted from confusion to something else entirely, a profound respect that spoke volumes without needing words. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he embraced her. "I didn't know." Brenda pulled him close, her arms wrapping around him tightly. She whispered softly, "I know, son. I know." The weight of everything that had built up between them over the years seemed to dissolve in that moment. It wasn't just a mother-son reunion. It was a new understanding between them, one born not just of blood, but of shared strength. And for the first time in a long while, Brenda felt truly seen, not as a mother, not as a woman who had been dismissed, but as the person she had always been, beneath it all, a warrior who had earned her place. Later that afternoon, as the reception unfolded, Captain Hayes approached Brenda. He stood before her, no longer brimming with arrogance, but with a humbled, remorseful posture. His voice was quiet. "There is no excuse for my behavior," he said, his words awkward but sincere. "I was arrogant, unprofessional, and wrong. I am truly sorry, ma'am." Brenda studied him for a long moment, seeing not the officer who had tried to diminish her, but the young man who had learned a hard lesson. "Apology accepted, Captain," she said, her tone kind but firm. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Before you check someone's ID, before you look at their pass or their uniform, look them in the eyes first. You'll learn a lot more that way." As she finished her words, a sense of quiet peace settled over her. She wasn't just a part of the military family. She had always been at the heart of it. Her actions, her sacrifices, her respect for those who served beside her had carved her place. And it would take far more than assumptions and prejudice to erase that.